on his own abilities, and everybody fantasizes that. I think the average male child grows up fantasizing what he'd be like if he could be really a very self-sufficient kind of human being and not have to worry about bolting the doors at night. That's what I do.
Absolutely, and I mean also there's a simplicity that probably people crave for. I mean, you talk in The Outlaw Josie Wales about sometimes you've got to be plum dog mean. Now, the person who works on a supermarket checkout counter or on a computer, I mean, even if they want to be tough and plum dog mean, I mean,
yeah, it was mad dog mean. Yeah, it was. But that's another example. It's like he's explaining to these people all what you have to do. You have to do this, and you have to defend yourself here, and you have to do that. But at some point, when all else fails, you just have to get mad dog mean, and that means you just use your last stroke of adrenaline to do whatever it is, either to fight off enemies or to swim across this raging river that's going to vacuum you down across the falls or whatever. There's some point in your life you have to exert a tremendous amount of adrenaline.
Do you think there was more justice in the Old West or in the world today?
More justice?
Yes.
I think things were probably a lot simpler then. Whether there was more justice, I don't know. Life was probably a little bit simpler, less complex, and maybe that's what is a part of the appeal. And they were down to now. We live in a society now that's extremely litigious, and we've had a lot of the legal profession has gotten into everything, and so everything is based upon what, if you hit me, I'll sue you for this and that, and everybody's into this suing everyone else, and that's even politicians now are getting kind of embarrassed about it and using it as campaign rhetoric, but we're in a society now where that's what we're living by.
That's right. You can imagine a scene in a saloon now where one guy hits the other one and he hands him a writ. You mean?
Right, exactly. He says, my lawyer, see my lawyer.
Yeah.
And after about 2 years in depositions, we'll get it all sorted out. That kind of thing, that's the kind of thing that I think the average man would not want to go see, or woman, man, there's no gender factor, would not want to go see and sit through all that kind of bureaucracy. I think they want to go sit through and see a person who deals with things. The romance of Unforgiven was these women that had injustice in their minds imposed on them, and all you're going to do is just let them off with a slap on the wrist. That wasn't fair, and so they set things in motion. Now, later on, they've come to regret that. How do you undo that? But you can't undo this thing once fate is set in motion.
Then, of course, a different sort of character in the Dirty Harry movies, which at the time when they first came out, everybody was very worried about them, and moralistic sort of very serious liberal objections and so on. But the New York Times just recently said, Eastwood caught a mood of blue-collar discontent with a country portrayed in the films as being run by bureaucrats, sociologists, appeasers, and incompetence. American society's deepest problem and incapacity, the Dirty Harry film said, was in failing to protect the normal lives of its normal people. Do you think you were 10 years ahead of your time? Or were you, as they said at the time, a terrifyingly corrupting force?
Yeah, a lot of people wrote a lot of things into it, or read a lot of things into it that weren't actually intended to be there. Basically, it was ahead of its time in the sense that people became concerned. People were becoming concerned. The political element of the country was way behind them, but the people were concerned about violent crime and the victims' rights. There was a lot of talk about the rights of the accused. At that time, Miranda and all these decisions were very, very popular to discuss and to write about, but people were kind of overlooking the victims of violent crime. Nowadays, of course, they have organizations and everything else that call attention to it, but and you can even in some cases they can demand some sort of retribution from the perpetrator. But it's at that time that wasn't being dramatized. There wasn't any films at that time that picked up on that, and so I think it was ahead of its time for that moment. I think since then many people have tried to explore that area, but it certainly wasn't politically motivated. Actually, Don Siegel and myself kind of felt that we were just doing, we thought it was an exciting detective story. But it did have those underlying things. It had a guy who had some sadness in his life, and he also was frustrated with a bureaucratic quagmire that we're in as a society. And it's there. It was there then in 1971. It is there now, and it was there probably decades before. But and as we see now, we entered a computer age. It's there in mass.
And more people, you mean, respond to that, have that feeling in their lives of helplessness, or?
I think so. I think it's a helplessness to it. It doesn't necessarily have to do with crime or robbery, homicide. It could just be a man in his job or a woman in their job that go to work every day, a tremendous amount of bureaucracy. And you go to, just to pay a traffic fine, you have to go through this and that, or go down to the motor vehicle and try to get your license and wait in line here and wait in line there. We don't realize how short it is, really, but we've watched lines in Russia for many years just to get a potato or something. But in this country, human beings other than people who are in the military or forced to don't like to queue up that long. You know, they like to kind of get things done. And when you see that kind of frustration, then that definitely, the only way you can get relief from that is maybe through some entertainment medium that can give you a temporary, catharsis.
Talking about technique for a moment. You once talked about the fact that critics think I just sit and squint, and Richard Burton said that you had the quality that Spencer Tracy and other people had of dynamic lethargy, in the sense of appearing to do nothing, but in fact doing everything, as he put it. And that's actually what first impressed him when he first worked with Elizabeth Taylor, in fact, too. I remember him saying. But I mean, do you do everything by doing nothing?
Well, he was, Richard was very fond of American actors in general. He felt that American actors, a lot of them had come up with it, able to work in a very condensed kind of way, possibly maybe because they don't have the history of theater that European actors might have had, dating back for so many years, and some of them just being brought up in movies. But yeah, there's an old adage. I remember a drama coach years ago saying, no, just parody on don't stand there, do something. They said, don't do something, just stand there. And it's kind of like the hardest thing in the world is just to step up in front of how many people, whether it's 10 or 500, and just stand there with your arms at your side and just be yourself. It's very, very difficult for anyone. It's easier said than done. Actors have to learn to do that. It's part of the technique. It's something you can't just do without sitting there and getting all wound up and God, I roll up in a ball kind of thing. But it's but after a while, if you have faith in yourself and your faith in what you're telling, you can do it with a minimal amount of expression, if that's what the character calls for. That doesn't mean every character should be played that way, but it kind of worked for me, especially in the early roles. But in doing that, you can't have nothing going on inside. Something has to be going on inside. As long as the inner self is working, the outer self can be extremely condensed. But if the inner self is dead, then nobody's going to watch you. They're just going to...
Right. If the inner sense is...
going out for popcorn as fast as you can imagine.
I mean, if the inner sense is dead, the eyes will be dead.
Oh, yeah. It'll show...
That's where it'll show, isn't it?
It'll reflect immediately in the eyes.
Not in the nose or anywhere, but in the eyes.
Well, the eyes, but everywhere else, too. The general sort of physical presence will diminish, but it probably would reflect in the eyes first, in most cases.
And that's the key. In a way, the bigger the screen, the less you have to do, in a way. I mean, if you were just doing something for television, would you have to, purely for television, would you act differently than if you're doing it for the movies?
I would just play the part and not worry about all that. I think it's important to move forward and do the work and not think about it. A lot of times people will say, well, on a stage you act a little differently, and you do. Maybe you have to project your voice a little more, and you can't. A whisper has to be a little accentuated. but by and large the technique, the inner self is the same, the inner technique, and a lot of people don't do anything any different. They do it both, they cross over into both mediums doing the exact same thing, and it works fine for them.
What about when you crossed over with Play Misty for Me to directing? You said at the time it took a real conscious effort to switch from the actor part to the director part.
Well,
what was the conscious effort?
It did, because I had never directed a film and acted in one. I'd never directed a film at that time, and also I had never talked to anybody who had ever done it. At that particular time in 1970, not many actors were directing. Though there was tremendous precedent for them historically, if you go back to, you know, Chaplin and Orson Welles and William S. Hart, whoever, everybody, Stan Laurel,
good lineage, good
precedent. They were doing it, and they learned a technique, obviously over trial and error, what have you. But I was doing my first film, and I'd never talked to anybody who had ever done it, so it was a very difficult thing. I'd have to go off and think from a visual directorial sense, and then step into the shot, and then shut out and think from an acting point of view. It's very hard. How much percentage of your mind do you do? Do you have 90% on acting and 10% on where you are, or do you look at 50-50 or what have you? You have 50-50 might not be adequate. You might, as an actor, come out really kind of flatten out if you're not careful. In fact, when I first started directing, Don Siegel, his one piece of advice for me is, he said, don't short yourself. And I said, what do you mean? And he said, well, just make sure that when you come around to photographing yourself in the various scenes, that you don't slough yourself, because that'll probably be your tendency, though he had never acted and directed.
Slough yourself meaning not want to hold people up,
yeah,
because it's you.
Just say, well, I'll do a quick shot here and we'll get it over with.